8-year-old Zara Johnson clutched her small chest, her tiny fingers pressing against her ribs as each breath became a battle she was slowly losing. The morning sunlight streaming through the kitchen window seemed to mock her struggle, while her stepmother Sandra moved around the kitchen with deliberate indifference, her heels clicking against the cold tile floor like a countdown timer. "Please," Zara whispered, her voice barely audible above the sound of running water. "I need my inhaler. I can't breathe properly." Sandra Martinez Johnson, a woman whose beauty was as sharp as broken glass, glanced over her shoulder with eyes that held no warmth. Her perfectly manicured nails drummed against the marble countertop as she dried her hands with theatrical slowness. At 35, she had married Zara's father, not for love, but for the comfortable life his construction business provided. The child was nothing more than an unwanted reminder of his past. "Your medicine is expensive, little girl," Sandra's voice dripped with false sweetness. "Daddy's been drinking away the money again. Maybe if you stopped being so dramatic, you wouldn't need those fancy drugs." Zara's brown eyes filled with tears as her chest tightened further. She had learned not to cry too loudly. It only made Sandra angrier. The 8-year-old pressed her small hand against the kitchen table, trying to steady herself as the familiar wheeze began to rattle in her throat. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory, gentle and reassuring. "When you can't breathe, baby girl, remember that each breath is a gift. Never let anyone take that gift away from you." But her mother was gone now, taken by cancer 2 years ago, leaving Zara in a house that no longer felt like home. "Daddy will be home soon," Zara managed between shallow breaths. "He'll get my medicine. He promised." Sandra's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Your daddy?" She turned around fully, revealing a face twisted with resentment. "Honey, your daddy is probably passed out in some bar right now, just like every other day this week. You think he cares about your little breathing problems when he can barely remember your name?" The words hit Zara harder than any physical blow could have. Deep down, she knew Sandra was telling a terrible truth. James Johnson had become a stranger since his wife's death, drowning his grief in bottles of whiskey and leaving his daughter to fend for herself in the care of a woman who saw her as nothing but a burden. From her backpack by the door, Zara pulled out a small notebook, her mother's last gift to her. Inside, she had written down every promise her father had made and broken, every time Sandra had hidden her medicine, every moment she had felt invisible in her own home. She clutched it like a lifeline, the way other children might hold a teddy bear. The front door slammed open with such force that both Sandra and Zara jumped. James Johnson stumbled inside, his work clothes wrinkled and stained, the smell of alcohol preceding him like a toxic cloud. His eyes were bloodshot and unfocused, his dark skin glistening with sweat despite the cool morning air. "Daddy!" Zara's voice cracked with hope and desperation. She struggled to her feet, her small body swaying slightly. "Daddy, I need my inhaler. Sandra put it somewhere and I can't find it and I can't breathe good and—" "Jesus Christ, Zara!" James's voice boomed through the kitchen, causing his daughter to flinch. "Can't a man come home without you immediately starting with your problems? My head is killing me." Sandra moved closer to her husband, her hand finding his arm with practiced manipulation. "She's been complaining all morning, baby. I think she's just looking for attention. You know how children can be." Zara felt the world tilt around her. The two adults who were supposed to protect her stood together, united in their indifference to her suffering. Her breathing became more labored, each wheeze a small cry for help that echoed unanswered in the large kitchen. "I'm not lying," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Please, Daddy, I just need my medicine. Mama said you'd always take care of me." At the mention of his late wife, James's face darkened. "Don't you dare bring your mother into this," he shouted, pointing an unsteady finger at his daughter. "She's gone, Zara. Gone. And I'm tired of you using her memory to manipulate me." The little girl's world shattered a little more. She sank back into her chair, her small frame trembling not just from her breathing difficulties, but from the crushing weight of abandonment. In that moment, she understood with heartbreaking clarity that she was truly alone. What Zara didn't know was that across the street, behind the pristine white curtains of the Morrison mansion, someone had been watching. Someone who had made a promise to a dying woman 2 years ago, a promise he was about to keep. The storm was coming, and it would change everything. Before we continue with this story, I want to hear from you. Have you ever felt invisible in your own home? Have you ever had to fight for something as basic as the medicine you need to breathe? Leave a comment and share your story. You are not alone. If this story has touched your heart so far, please rate it from 1 to 10. Now let's see what happens when a grandfather's love becomes unstoppable. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the living room as Zara sat curled up in the corner of the old leather couch, her notebook pressed against her chest like armor. Her breathing had worsened since the morning confrontation, each wheeze a reminder of the inhaler that remained hidden somewhere in the house. Sandra moved through the room like a predator circling its prey, her red fingernails catching the light as she dusted shelves that were already spotless. "You know what your problem is, little girl?" Sandra's voice was honey-sweet with venom underneath. She paused in front of the family photo on the mantel, the last picture taken before Zara's mother died. With deliberate cruelty, she turned the frame face down. "You think the world owes you something just because your mama got sick." Zara's small fingers tightened around her notebook. Inside its pages, she had written down everything. The dates Sandra had forgotten to pick up her prescription. The times her medicine had mysteriously disappeared. The cruel words that cut deeper than any physical wound. Her mother had taught her to write down important things, saying, "Baby girl, your words have power. Never let anyone convince you that what you experienced didn't happen." "I just want to breathe normal," Zara whispered, her voice barely audible. "Like other kids do." Sandra's laugh was sharp as breaking glass. "Normal? Honey, normal kids don't cost their families hundreds of dollars every month for fancy medicines. Normal kids don't make their daddies feel guilty every time they look at them." The words hit their mark. Zara had overheard the fights between Sandra and her father about money, about her medical expenses, about how much easier life would be without the extra burden. Each argument had planted seeds of guilt in her young heart, making her wonder if she really was the problem Sandra claimed she was. James emerged from the kitchen, a beer bottle already half empty in his hand despite it being only 3 in the afternoon. His work shirt was unbuttoned, revealing a chest that had once been strong but now seemed hollow, carved out by grief and alcohol. He collapsed into his recliner without looking at his daughter, the leather creaking under his weight like a sigh of disappointment. "Daddy?" Zara tried again, her voice thick with unshed tears. "Can you please help me find my inhaler? I looked everywhere and—" "For Christ's sake, Zara!" James slammed his beer bottle down so hard that foam spilled onto the coffee table. "Can't you see I'm exhausted? I work 10-hour days to keep this roof over our heads, and all I hear when I come home is complaining." Sandra moved to stand behind James's chair, her hands resting possessively on his shoulders. "She's been at it all day, baby. I've tried explaining that maybe if she exercised more, if she ate better, if she didn't get herself so worked up all the time." "Maybe Sandra's right," James muttered, not meeting his daughter's eyes. "Your mother babied you too much. Maybe it's time you learned to be stronger." The betrayal hit Zara like a physical blow. Her father, the man who had once carried her on his shoulders, who had sung lullabies when her mother was too sick, who had promised at the funeral that he would always protect her, was choosing Sandra's lies over his daughter's desperate need for basic medical care. Zara's breathing became more labored as emotion and asthma combined into a perfect storm. She stood up on unsteady legs, her notebook falling to the floor, pages fluttering open to reveal her careful documentation of neglect and cruelty. Mama said you loved me more than anything in the world." "Your mama's dead," James roared, finally looking at his daughter with eyes that held more anger than love. "She's been dead for 2 years, Zara, and I'm tired of living with her ghost." The silence that followed was deafening. Sandra's smile was triumphant, a cat that had finally cornered its mouse. James immediately looked away, shame flickering across his features for just a moment before the alcohol drowned it again. And Zara felt something die inside her chest, something that had nothing to do with her asthma. She bent down to collect her scattered notebook pages, her small hands shaking. On one page, written in her mother's careful handwriting from their last hospital visit, were the words, "Remember, baby girl, your grandfather loves you so much. If Mama can't be there anymore, Grandpa Samuel will find a way to help you," he promised. Zara had almost forgotten about her grandfather. Samuel Morrison, her mother's father, lived in the big white house across the street. He and her father had fought bitterly at the funeral about something she'd been too young to understand. Since then, he had been a distant figure, occasionally visible in his garden but never approaching their house. Her father had forbidden any contact, saying the old man was poison and wanted to take her away. But now, as Zara struggled to breathe and felt more alone than ever, she wondered if her mother's words held a promise she had been too afraid to claim. "I'm going to my room," she whispered, clutching her notebook. Neither adult responded. Sandra had already moved on to rearranging the decorative pillows, erasing any trace of Zara's presence in the living room. James stared at the blank television screen, his beer growing warm in his hands. As Zara climbed the stairs, each step an effort that left her more breathless, she paused at her mother's old bedroom door. Sandra had redecorated it completely, removing every trace of the woman who had filled this house with love and laughter. But Zara remembered everything. The way her mother's perfume had smelled like vanilla and hope, the songs she had sung while braiding Zara's hair, the stories she had told about how much Grandpa Samuel had loved being a father and how excited he was to be a grandfather. In her own room, Zara sat by the window that faced the Morrison mansion. The house was beautiful, with its white columns and perfectly manicured garden. Sometimes she had seen an elderly black man tending the roses, moving with the careful dignity of someone who had built something meaningful with his life. She had wondered if that was her grandfather, if he ever looked toward their house and thought about her. Her breathing was getting worse. The tightness in her chest felt like a rubber band being stretched to its breaking point. She needed her inhaler, needed it desperately, but Sandra had hidden it somewhere Zara couldn't find. It was a game to her stepmother, a way of maintaining control and proving that Zara's very survival depended on her whims. Zara opened her notebook to a fresh page and began to write, her handwriting shaky but determined. Day 847 since Mama died. Sandra hid my medicine again. Daddy chose her side again. I think maybe I really am going to die like the kids on TV who can't breathe. If I do, I want someone to know that I tried to be good. I tried to make Daddy love me again. I tried not to cost too much money. But maybe some kids aren't supposed to be wanted. As she wrote, she didn't notice the figure that had appeared in the garden across the street. An elderly man with salt and pepper hair who had stopped his gardening to look directly at her window. Samuel Morrison had been watching this house for 2 years, waiting for the right moment, gathering evidence, and preparing for the day when his granddaughter would need him most. That day was coming sooner than either of them knew. Samuel Morrison had built his fortune from nothing, rising from a janitor's son to owning the largest construction supply company in the state. But no amount of money could ease the pain of watching his granddaughter suffer from across the street. At 72, his hair was silver white, his dark skin weathered by decades of hard work, but his mind remained sharp as a razor. And for 2 years, that sharp mind had been documenting every instance of neglect he witnessed in the house that should have been filled with love. The private investigator's report lay open on his mahogany desk, photographs and medical records spread like pieces of a puzzle that painted a horrifying picture. Zara's asthma medication had been prescribed monthly, but the pharmacy records showed Sandra had only picked up the prescription 4 times in the past 6 months. The rest of the time, his granddaughter had been left to suffer. "Monsters," Samuel whispered, his hands trembling with rage as he looked at a photograph of Zara, sitting alone on her front porch, her small chest rising and falling with obvious difficulty. "They're slowly killing my baby girl." His lawyer, Martin Chen, sat across from him in the leather chair, his expression grave. They had been preparing for this moment for months, gathering evidence that would be strong enough to stand up in court. We have enough for emergency custody, Samuel. The medical neglect alone is sufficient. But you need to be prepared. James is still her father. The courts will want to see if rehabilitation is possible before they permanently remove her. Samuel's jaw clenched. That boy killed my daughter with his drinking and his selfishness. I won't let him kill my granddaughter, too. He stood and walked to the window that faced the Johnson house. In the upstairs window, he could see Zara's small silhouette. Even from this distance, he could tell she was struggling. The investigation had revealed more than just medical neglect. Sandra Martinez Johnson had a history that made Samuel's blood run cold. She had been married twice before, both times to men with children from previous relationships. In both cases, those children had mysteriously developed behavioral problems that required them to be sent away to relatives or boarding schools. Sandra had a pattern of isolating men from their children, of making the children seem like burdens until their fathers chose her over their own flesh and blood. But she had chosen the wrong child this time. Zara was not just any little girl. She was a Morrison, granddaughter to a man who had never lost a fight he believed was worth fighting. Samuel's phone buzzed, a text from his security consultant. Motion detected in subject's backyard, Sandra J. disposing of something in trash, photos attached. The photographs showed Sandra throwing away a small brown pharmacy bag. Samuel's hands shook as he zoomed in on the image. Even from the grainy security footage, he could make out the prescription label. Zara's asthma medication, unopened, being discarded like garbage. That's it, Samuel said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of a man who had made his final decision. Martin, file the emergency petition first thing Monday morning. I'm done watching. But across the street, Zara's condition was deteriorating faster than Monday morning. At 8 o'clock that evening, Zara sat at the dinner table, her breathing so labored that each exhale sounded like a small cry. Sandra had prepared an elaborate meal, herb-crusted salmon, roasted vegetables, wine for the adults, but had placed only a peanut butter sandwich in front of Zara. Growing girls need simple food, Sandra explained to James, her voice dripping with false concern. All those rich foods just make her condition worse. Isn't that right, sweetheart? Zara barely had the breath to respond. The tightness in her chest felt like a vice being slowly cranked tighter. She had searched the house again while Sandra was out shopping, looking for her inhaler in every drawer, every closet, every possible hiding place. Nothing. She looks pale, James observed, though his words were slightly slurred from the bottle of wine he had already half finished. Maybe we should... Should what? Sandra interrupted sharply. Rush her to the emergency room again so they can tell us what they always tell us, that she's having an anxiety attack because she doesn't get enough attention? Do you know how much those hospital visits cost us, James? James looked away, the familiar weight of guilt and manipulation settling over him like a blanket. Sandra had convinced him over the past 2 years that Zara's medical episodes were largely psychological, that his daughter was manipulating him the same way his late wife had manipulated him with her cancer treatments. I have a better idea, Sandra continued, her voice taking on a tone that made Zara's skin crawl. Since she claims she can't breathe properly, maybe she should sleep outside tonight. Fresh air might do her some good. Zara's eyes went wide with terror. The October night was cold, and sleeping outside without her medication could be dangerous, even deadly. Please, she whispered, the word barely audible. I'll be good. I won't ask for anything else. You heard your stepmother, James said, not meeting his daughter's eyes. Maybe some fresh air will help clear your head. It was in that moment that Zara understood she was truly on her own. The 2 adults who should have protected her were willing to let her suffer, even if it meant risking her life. She stood up slowly, her legs shaky, and walked toward the sliding glass door that led to the backyard. But as she reached for the door handle, a sound stopped her in her tracks. The sound of a car engine in the driveway, followed by footsteps on the front porch. Heavy, determined footsteps that seemed to shake the entire house. Then came the knock. Not the polite tap of a neighbor or the tentative rap of a delivery person. This was the knock of someone who would not be ignored, someone who would not be turned away. It echoed through the house like thunder, full of purpose and barely contained fury. Sandra and James exchanged glances, both suddenly nervous. They weren't expecting anyone, and there was something about the authority in that knock that made both of them instinctively straighten their shoulders. "James Johnson!" A voice boomed from the other side of the door, deep and commanding. "Open this door right now." Zara's heart leaped. She knew that voice, had heard it in her dreams and in the stories her mother used to tell. It was the voice of the man in the White House across the street, the voice of the grandfather she had been forbidden to know. Samuel Morrison had come for his granddaughter, and from the sound of his voice, he was not leaving without her. Have you ever been in a situation where you felt completely helpless, where the adults who were supposed to protect you had failed you completely? Zara is about to discover that sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places. Sometimes, when all hope seems lost, love finds a way to break down every barrier. What do you think Samuel Morrison is going to do when he sees the state his granddaughter is in? Share your thoughts, because this story is about to explode into action. The front door splintered under the force of Samuel Morrison's shoulder as he burst into the house, his eyes blazing with righteous fury. Behind him stood Detective Maria Rodriguez and a paramedic team, all armed with legal documents and medical equipment. Samuel's expensive suit was wrinkled from his determination to break down any barrier between him and his granddaughter. "What the hell?" James started, stumbling to his feet, wineglass shattering on the floor. "Where is she?" Samuel's voice cut through the room like a blade. His eyes swept the dining room, taking in the elaborate meal for 2 adults and the single peanut butter sandwich that had been left for Zara. "Where is my granddaughter?" Sandra backed against the wall, her face pale beneath her makeup. "You have no right to be here. This is our home. James, call the police." Detective Rodriguez stepped forward, her badge gleaming in the light. "The police are already here, ma'am. We have a warrant for emergency welfare check and potential child endangerment charges." Samuel's eyes found Zara, who stood frozen by the sliding glass door, her small frame shaking with each labored breath. The sight of her, so thin, so pale, so obviously struggling to breathe, nearly brought the powerful man to his knees. This was his daughter's baby, the little girl he had held when she was born, the child he had been forced to watch suffer from a distance for 2 long years. "Oh, baby girl," Samuel whispered, moving toward her with surprising gentleness for such a large man. "Grandpa's here now. Everything's going to be okay." Zara looked up at him with eyes that held both hope and fear. She had dreamed of this moment, but had almost given up believing it could be real. "Grandpa Samuel?" Her voice was barely a whisper, punctuated by the wheeze that had become the soundtrack of her suffering. "That's right, sweetheart. I'm here." Samuel knelt down to her level, his hands hovering near her but not touching, understanding that traumatized children needed to feel in control. "Can you tell me where your medicine is?" Before Zara could answer, Sandra stepped forward, her mask of innocence sliding back into place. "There's been a misunderstanding. Zara is fine. She just gets dramatic sometimes, especially when she wants attention. Don't you, honey?" The paramedic, a young woman named Lisa Chen, was already examining Zara with practiced efficiency. "Sir, this child is in respiratory distress. Her oxygen saturation is dangerously low. She needs immediate medical attention." "She's lying," Sandra screamed, her composure finally cracking. "They're all lying. The child is manipulative, just like her mother was." Samuel rose slowly, his full height and presence filling the room like a gathering storm. When he spoke, his voice was deadly quiet. "Do not speak about my daughter. Ever." James, who had been standing in stunned silence, finally found his voice. "Dad, look, I know we've had our differences, but you can't just—" "I can't what, James?" Samuel turned to face his son-in-law, and for the first time, James saw the full weight of the older man's contempt. "I can't save my granddaughter from dying under your roof? I can't protect her from the woman you chose over your own child?" Detective Rodriguez was photographing the scene while another officer searched for Zara's medication. "Found something," Officer Jenkins called from the kitchen. He emerged holding a trash bag. "Prescription bottle unopened, discarded in the garbage. Zara Johnson, asthma medication, filled 3 days ago." The silence that followed was deafening. Sandra's face went white as the evidence of her cruelty was laid bare for everyone to see. She had been caught, literally throwing away a child's medication like garbage. "You threw away her medicine?" James's voice was thick with disbelief and dawning horror. "Sandra, you told me she was being dramatic. You said the doctors were wrong. You said—" "I saved us money," Sandra shrieked, her mask completely fallen now. "Do you know how much those medications cost? How much easier our lives could be without constantly worrying about her medical bills? She's not even your real daughter. She's a burden, a constant reminder of your dead wife." The slap that echoed through the room came not from Samuel, but from James. His hand connected with Sandra's cheek with a sound like breaking glass, the impact of 2 years of manipulation and lies finally hitting home. "She is my daughter," James said, his voice broken but finally clear. "She's my little girl and God forgive me, what have I done?" Paramedic Chen had already started Zara on oxygen and was preparing to transport her to the hospital. "We need to go now," she said urgently. "This child needs immediate treatment." Samuel gathered his granddaughter into his arms, feeling how light she had become, how fragile. "I'm coming with you, baby girl. Grandpa's not leaving you ever again." As they prepared to leave for the hospital, Detective Rodriguez was placing handcuffs on Sandra. "Sandra Martinez Johnson, you're under arrest for child endangerment, medical neglect, and reckless endangerment of a minor." "This isn't over!" Sandra screamed as she was led away. "She's not your granddaughter! You have no rights! I'll fight this!" But her threats fell on deaf ears. Samuel was already in the ambulance with Zara, holding her small hand as the paramedics worked to stabilize her breathing. The little girl looked up at him with eyes that were still afraid but no longer hopeless. "Grandpa," she whispered through the oxygen mask. "I wrote everything down. In my notebook. All the time she hid my medicine. All the mean things she said. Mama taught me to write important things down." Samuel's eyes filled with tears. Even in her darkest moments, his granddaughter had been documenting her abuse, collecting evidence, fighting back in the only way an 8-year-old could. She was indeed her mother's daughter, and his granddaughter. "You're so brave, baby girl," he whispered, squeezing her hand gently. "So smart and so brave. Your mama would be so proud of you." As the ambulance raced toward the hospital, James sat alone in his destroyed dining room, surrounded by broken glass and shattered illusions. For the first time in 2 years, the fog of alcohol and manipulation had lifted, and he could see clearly what he had allowed to happen to his precious daughter. He had failed her, failed them both. But Samuel Morrison had kept his promise to a dying woman, and now the healing could finally begin. 3 weeks after the rescue, Zara sat in the sunroom of her grandfather's mansion, her small fingers wrapped around a warm mug of hot chocolate. The October morning light streamed through the tall windows, catching the steam that rose from her cup like tiny clouds. For the first time in months, her breathing was steady and clear. Her inhaler sat within easy reach on the small table beside her, no longer a treasure to be hidden, but a simple tool that helped her live. Samuel Morrison watched his granddaughter from the doorway, his heart both breaking and healing at the same time. The child who had been returned to him was so different from the vibrant little girl he remembered from before her mother's death. Zara was quieter now, more careful, always watching the adults around her as if waiting for them to change their minds about wanting her. "How are you feeling today, baby girl?" Samuel asked softly as he entered the room, carrying his own cup of coffee. He had learned to approach slowly, to announce his presence, to let Zara see him coming. Trauma had taught her to be watchful, and healing meant respecting the defenses she had built to survive. "Better," Zara replied, her voice still soft but stronger than it had been in the hospital. "Dr. Martinez says my lungs are getting healthier every day." The pediatric pulmonologist had been amazed at how quickly Zara's condition improved once she had consistent access to her medication and was removed from the stress of her previous environment. But the doctor had also been clear. The physical healing was only the beginning. The emotional trauma would take much longer to address. A gentle knock on the front door interrupted their morning routine. Samuel checked his watch. 9 o'clock exactly. "That'll be your father," he said carefully, watching Zara's reaction. For the past 2 weeks, James had been coming to visit his daughter under supervised conditions. He had completed a residential alcohol treatment program and was attending daily AA meetings. The courts had mandated therapy for him as well, both individual counseling and sessions focused on rebuilding his relationship with Zara. Zara's grip tightened slightly on her mug, but she nodded. "Is Mrs. Peterson coming too?" "Yes, sweetheart. Remember, she's here to make sure everyone feels safe and comfortable." Mrs. Catherine Peterson was the family therapist assigned to help navigate this delicate process. A woman in her 50s with kind eyes and an unshakable calm, she had experience working with families torn apart by addiction and abuse. Her presence meant that Zara never had to be alone with her father until she was ready, and that every conversation had a witness who prioritized the child's well-being. Samuel opened the door to find James standing on the porch, holding a small wrapped gift. The man who entered was different from the one who had stumbled through his house in a drunken rage 3 weeks ago. James was clean-shaven, his clothes neat, his eyes clear but filled with a deep sadness that seemed to have replaced the anger that had consumed him. "Hello, Mr. Morrison," James said formally, his voice steady but humble. "Thank you for letting me come." "Daddy?" Zara's voice came from the sunroom, cautious but curious. James's composure cracked for just a moment when he heard his daughter's voice. He swallowed hard, gathering himself before entering the sunroom where Mrs. Peterson was already setting up her notes. "Hi, sweetheart," James said softly, remaining standing until Mrs. Peterson gestured for him to sit in the chair across from Zara. Close enough to talk, far enough to let her feel safe. "You look different," Zara observed, studying her father with the intense attention that children give to adults when they're trying to figure out if it's safe to hope. "I feel different," James admitted. "I've been working very hard to get better, to become the daddy you deserve." Mrs. Peterson opened her notebook. "Zara, last week you mentioned that you had some questions for your father. Would you like to ask them now?" Zara looked down at her hot chocolate, gathering courage. Over the past weeks, she had been working with a child psychologist to understand that her father's actions weren't her fault, that addiction was a disease, and that she had the right to ask for answers to the questions that kept her awake at night. "Why did you believe Sandra instead of me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. James closed his eyes, the question hitting him like a physical blow. He had been preparing for this moment in therapy, but hearing it from his daughter's lips made the shame almost unbearable. "Because I was sick, baby girl," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Not sick in your body like you were, but sick in my mind and my heart. When Mama died, I was so sad and so scared that I started drinking to make the sadness go away. But drinking made me confused. It made me believe lies instead of truth. It made me forget how much I love you." Zara considered this explanation, her young mind working to understand concepts that many adults struggled with. "But I'm your daughter. Wasn't that enough to make you remember?" The question shattered something inside James. Tears began to flow down his cheeks as he leaned forward, being careful not to invade Zara's space. "It should have been enough, sweetheart. You should have been enough. The problem wasn't with you. It was with me. I failed you, and I'm so sorry. When Sandra said mean things about me, why didn't you tell her to stop?" "Because I was a coward," James answered honestly. Mrs. Peterson had taught him that children could handle truth better than lies, even when the truth was painful. "I let her convince me that you were the problem because it was easier than admitting that I was the problem. I was too weak to stand up for you when you needed me most." Zara set down her mug and pulled out her notebook, the same one where she had documented her abuse, but which now also contained her thoughts about healing and forgiveness. "Dr. Sarah says that sorry is just a word unless you do things to prove you mean it." Dr. Sarah Okafor was Zara's child psychologist. a woman who specialized in helping children recover from trauma. She had been working with Zara to understand that forgiveness was a process, not a destination, and that it was okay to take as much time as she needed. "Dr. Sarah is right," James said. "That's why I've been going to meetings every day to learn how to stay sober. That's why I'm seeing a therapist to learn how to be a better father. That's why I signed papers giving Grandpa Samuel legal guardianship of you, so you'll always be safe even if I mess up again." This was news to Zara. She looked at her grandfather, who nodded gently. "It means you'll live here with me for as long as you want, baby girl. Your father can visit, and maybe someday you can visit him, but only when you feel ready and only when everyone agrees it's safe." The gift James had brought was still sitting on the table, wrapped in paper covered with butterflies. Zara's favorite. "I brought you something," he said carefully. "Not to try to make you forgive me, but because I want you to know that I remember things about you that I should never have forgotten." Zara looked at Mrs. Peterson, who nodded encouragingly. Slowly, she unwrapped the gift to reveal a beautiful leather-bound journal with her name embossed in gold on the cover. "Dr. Williams told me how smart you were to write everything down," James explained. "How brave you were to keep track of what was happening even when the adults in your life weren't protecting you. I thought maybe you'd like a special place to write about good things now, about your new life with Grandpa Samuel." For the first time since her father had entered the room, Zara smiled. It was small and cautious, but it was real. "Thank you, Daddy. It's beautiful." The session continued for another hour, with Mrs. Peterson helping father and daughter navigate their complicated feelings. When it was time for James to leave, he stood slowly, clearly not wanting to go. Can I hug you goodbye?" he asked, his voice hopeful but prepared for rejection. Zara considered this for a long moment. Then she stood and walked over to him, accepting a gentle hug that lasted just long enough for both of them to remember what love felt like when it wasn't poisoned by addiction and manipulation. "I'm going to keep getting better," James whispered into her hair. "For you, and for Mama's memory." After he left, Zara curled up next to her grandfather on the couch, her new journal in her lap. "Grandpa Samuel," she said thoughtfully, "do you think people can really change?" Samuel wrapped his arm around his granddaughter, breathing in the sweet scent of her hair. "I think some people can, baby girl. But change is hard work, and it takes a long time. What matters is that you never have to wait for someone else to change before you can be safe and loved." As the afternoon sun filled the room with golden light, Zara opened her new journal and began to write. Day 1 of my new life. Today, I asked Daddy some hard questions, and he told me the truth. I'm still scared sometimes, but Grandpa Samuel says being scared is okay as long as you're also safe. I think maybe I'm starting to learn how to breathe again, not just with my lungs, but with my heart too. What does healing look like to you? Is it possible to forgive someone who has hurt you deeply while still protecting yourself? Zara is learning that love and safety can coexist, that she can honor her feelings while still leaving room for hope. But every healing journey has setbacks and breakthroughs. What do you think the final chapter of this story will bring? Share your thoughts as we approach the end of Zara's journey toward wholeness.